Hazelwood v. Kohlmeyer reached the Supreme Court on October 13, 1987. This case set the precedent for student freedom of speech that still applies in court cases today. Hazelwood v. Kohlmeyer set the expectation that although students still retain their First Amendment rights, school officials are responsible for censoring and preventing any speech that interferes with the basic educational mission.
During this case, students of the Hazelwood Journalism II class argued that their First Amendment right to freedom of speech was violated when stories they had published in their school newspaper, The Spectrum, were censored.
The stories they attempted to publish were about teenage pregnancy and the impacts of divorce. The students submitted these stories to Principal Robert Reynolds for review, and he removed 2 pages with the inappropriate stories without consulting the students.
Reynolds believed that in the story about teen pregnancy, the student could still be identified, despite the use of a fake name. Additionally, the name of the student in the divorce story had been included in the version of the articles Reynolds received, but in the final copy, the names had been taken out.
By censoring the 2 articles, Reynolds had shortened the usual 6-page newspaper to 4 pages and said the students could either publish only 4 pages or none at all. 3 students from the class, Kathy Kohlmeyer, Leon Tippett, and Leslie Smart, filed a lawsuit in 1985. The Eastern District Court sided with the school, deciding that there was no violation of the students' First Amendment rights.
The students appealed to the Eighth Circuit Court, and the court ruled in favor of the students, that the Spectrum was a tool for student expression. However, Hazelwood was unsatisfied with this decision and appealed to the Supreme Court. Tinker v. Des Moines established that students are able to express their beliefs as long as it does not substantially disrupt the education of their peers. When students wore black armbands in protest of the Vietnam War in 1969, the school suspended them. The students filed a lawsuit against the school for violating their First Amendment rights. When taken to the Supreme Court, the decision was in favor of the students.
During the debate of Hazelwood v. Kohlmeyer in the Supreme Court, the students argued that because of Tinker v. Des Moines precedent, they still retain the right to freedom of speech and expression if their actions didn't cause major disruption.
However, Hazelwood argued that although it may not have caused a commotion among their peers, the stories would have been unsuitable for the younger audiences that read the articles. Additionally, mentions of birth control and sexual activity were inappropriate for the maturity levels of some of the audience.
In a 5-3 vote, the Supreme Court decided that school officials needed to have standards for what could and could not be published, and that it was their responsibility and right to censor anything that interfered with their educational mission. Therefore, school-sponsored newspapers could be censored as long as school officials and educators could prove there was a legitimate concern.
Additionally, it was decided that the paper was a classroom activity and not a public forum, and therefore could be subject to censorship.
Also in this decision, the Supreme Court ruled that the Tinker v. Des Moines case was a precedent for student expression, and less so about the freedom of speech. This smaller decision set Hazelwood v. Kohlmeyer as the new precedent for the limits on student freedom of speech.
These censorship rules were later extended to online platforms as the school newspapers began to move onto the internet, which meant the censorship rules still applied on online forums.
Furthermore, this case continued to resurface and was used as a precedent in the case Morse v. Frederick, in which a student had displayed a banner saying "Bong hits for Jesus" during a school-sanctioned activity. The Hazelwood decision was used to determine that the student could be punished for supporting the use of illegal drugs.
It is still unclear if Hazelwood v. Kohlmeyer extends to after-school activities. At minimum, 2 courts have ruled that it does not count as a precedent case for extracurriculars, but at least one other court ruled that as long as the activity is under the supervision of a staff member at the school, it falls under the precedent set by Hazelwood.
Hazelwood v. Kohlmeyer not only had a lasting impact on school newspaper censorship, but also the students involved. Today, Kathy Kohlmeyer is 56 years old, and she travels across the country giving speeches to student audiences with the goal of restoring press rights.
These impacts are just part of the lasting changes the Hazelwood v. Kohlmeyer decision created. With questions about banning controversial books in today's education system, Hazelwood v. Kohlmeier will most likely be used to challenge whether or not censoring certain books is beyond the responsibilities of educators.